Hello, sir.
Hello.
Yeah, I met you. You contacted me after I did an interview with David, and we just dove right into it. And you're just so people who are watching know who you are, if they don't know already. You started, how I met you is through Rebel Wisdom, which is the channel that you started, correct?
Yeah, I started with David. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you also are doing something around psychedelics and therapy or something like that, right?
Yeah. I That's a world I'm really involved in. I'm one of the organizers of a big conference here in London that happens every 2 years called Breaking
Uh-huh.
Convention, which is about 1,500 people this last summer and has kind of grown. And my wife works in psychedelic research as well, and a lot of my friends do. And when I was younger, when I was sort of early 20s, I wrote a novel which was set around that whole area. So it's been, and I used to do a podcast as well about visionary art, which is sort of the art from that
Mm.
world. So it's been really, yeah, it's been a big part of my life for quite a long time.
Wow, you're kind of trippy, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. I am.
I
It,
remember our first conversation. I really appreciated our first conversation. We just dove right into it. Started talking about Gnosticism and temporal time, temporality, and had goosebumps and sparks. It was like I was like, oh yeah, there's something familiar about. It's interesting that there's a familiarity I have with you that isn't justified, right, by any rational or reasonable standards. But there's something I sense in what you're up to and who you are, and I think just the way that you respond to me, to this word, but also respond. It's an interesting response that you have to life. To like one of them, which is starting a whole channel, which I'm sure has been a whole ride that I want to talk with you about, and also starting psychedelic organizations, right? Writing novels. It's an interesting response to existence.
hmm. It's really interesting that phrase "response to life" or "response to existence."
Mhm.
Really stuck with me as soon as you said it.
Mm.
I'm kind of wondering, like, I don't think I've ever. Well, I don't know how often I conceptualize the things that I'm doing or thinking or whatever it might be as a response to life. Although I think that rings true.
Mhm.
Um, there's a sort of I don't know. I'm kind of thinking out loud. It's just really interesting because I suppose it is a response to life. It's a response to, I guess,
Mhm.
everything. What we're all doing is somehow responding to our environment.
Yeah.
And it's weird for me because it doesn't. It's weird for me that is weird. Like it doesn't necessarily feel like a response. It just feels like stuff that feels like the natural thing to do. If that makes sense. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, for example, with the psychedelics, it was having an experience when I was like 18, and I remember really vividly that being an experience of homecoming and a sense of, oh, of course, yeah, of course. This is like in my first mushroom experience. There was just that sense of naturalness of
Yeah.
yeah, yes, reality. This is more of reality, and of course, I had a feeling that it had always been there and was ever present, and I was remembering. That's a lovely word. They're kind of remembering, putting a
Mhm.
piece of yourself back, and I guess a lot of the stuff um, has been since then has also been in a sense feeling like not like it just all comes like so easily and it's just like in some kind of total flow, because that's not the case at all, but at least some sense of um, things just seeming obviously like the thing to do in that moment.
Hmm.
After much pain and sorrow often, but eventually coming to the point of, oh
Yes,
yeah, okay, this feels like the thing to do. Yeah.
totally. Well, I just looked at your response to my saying to you noticing that I used the word response, and you went, "Huh, I've never thought about it like that." Basically, that's kind of strange that I wouldn't, but I guess it is. And then you also said it was weird that I don't think about it like that, and then you just move towards it. So just that that's what I mean.
Yeah. Well, it's fun. I find it really fun. I find that, like, because David and I are trained in our counseling training was very much based around this method called inquiry, which is
Yeah.
from the Diamond Essence H. Almas kind of tradition. And
Mhm.
I remember like doing a lot of that, finding it just really fun. Like just kind of following the threads, whether there's like a somatic thread or if it's like a cognitive thread of, never thought like that or whatever it might be. I find it really enjoyable. Like this, I just find it enjoyable as a way to
Yeah.
approach things if I'm in the right space. Not always in the right space for that, which I think is probably true of most of us, I would
Right.
say. But I know, and that in itself is a thing of noticing when I'm not in a space of inquiry and when I'm shut down and I'm feeling defensive or not open or whatever it is. But right now I feel like in that space, which is good. So
Yeah. That's impressive, especially considering that you're moving
yeah.
into a boat
Into a boat,
and you
yeah.
have to downsize in order to do it.
Yeah, so a bunch of stuff today on our version of Craigslist, which is called Gumtree, which is just a whole process of stripping away stuff, which feels for me really good, like really liberating. It's maybe too strong a word for it, but like it's somewhat liberating. Just this kind of feeling more nimble. And the
Yeah.
boat, of course, like in a boat, like technically we can move the boat. It's a fixed position, but even just knowing that it's possible to go,
Yeah.
And go down the canal is it's a cool feeling.
That is that's interesting. Well, I was wondering about, when you talked about your what you and David did with the diamond heart work and the thing about inquiry and just following a thread, um, and following your interest and that your responsiveness to that, right? Like it seems to me that if I just looking from the outside and I look like the way that rebel wisdom unfolds, it looks like a fractal to me, that in a certain sense that what you guys seem to be doing is basically following a thread, and you are I think increasingly in my experience more and more self-aware and inclusive of yourself and your own interest in the process, as it seems like the channel, you're both creating a channel, but you're also listening for what the channel is as you're creating it. So it has this kind of self-awareness to it. It's been really interesting to watch, but it sounds, I'm imagining that that's very reflective of you, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's reflective of both me and David in our attitudes and something that has brought us together as well.
Mm.
Uh, and you're right, there there is definitely the experience and feeling of following a thread from the entire genesis of the channel. I mean, it's interesting because before the media channel, Rebel Wisdom, the brand existed for a few months before that because we came up with it for our men's work. And we did have David had filmed one thing when we were out at this kind of Nordic men's gathering, which had been sort of viral on Facebook. And it was like, that's cool. But then there was a thread of, he went to go see a Jordan Peterson talk. And that almost didn't happen as well because he had some visa problem at the airport. That wasn't working. And Jordan Peterson hadn't exploded yet. It was sort of following that thread. And then, at the beginning of the channel, there was a lot of like exploring that phenomena. And then there was following the thread of the IDW, the intellectual dark web. And then following the thread of I guess what we're looking at now, the kind of emergent sense-making space, which you're in as well. There's this kind of new group of people. And then it always feels like it's following what's emerging. And I think one of the things we often say is like, we've just got to ride the wave. Like no one is the wave, but the wave is there. And so the skill is to be able to feel into the zeitgeist, feel into what's moving where. And for me personally, that's kind of an entirely intuitive process. And there's a sort of intuitive trust in literally just following my feeling of not really feeling that conversation, not really feeling that that's a complete picture of this or that, and doing it. Obviously, like the mind comes into it very much as well, but the very first impulse is, does it feel right?
Yeah.
Which is often negated in a lot of, businesses and I don't know, cultural institutions, but for me is crucial. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that initial felt sense, or like, how does it feel right or not? That initial kind of meeting, um, seems to me like one of the things that is it's interesting to watch you guys, right, and to be a part of it as well. But this quality of what is it that you're feeling into, right? And this kind of coordinated coupledness with the world. And I would imagine there's a quality of, I wanted to ask you about this too. It's just your personal experience of doing the channel, like that felt sense, which you can do that internally, which you've been doing, but there's also this way in which you're doing it in relationship to what you're showing, 100,000 people on your channel or something like that. There's the deepening of that intuition, or the deepening of that felt sense, right? And that coordinated activity is a real mysterious thing when you look at, well, what is it? How do you know to move this way versus that way? And as you go through time, you can become more and more attuned to that, right? But there's you never reach the end of it. But I'm wondering about, like, what's the ride been like for you personally in the development of that? Like when you interview, or when you set up interviews, or the conflicts that come up in making the channel and your relationship with David. Like, I get this sense that what's unfolding on the channel is very attuned to the work that you guys are doing on yourselves.
Yeah. Yes, it has to be. And that's a really interesting question. And it is like, there's a Pandora's box in my chest of feeling into, of just like a lot of stuff, a lot of experience over the last, like, I spent about 2 years, I guess. Yeah, it has been like in itself a process of inquiry and personal growth. And like David and I have gone through big inquiries together, and big, like, all the ups and downs of being close friends and kind of running a project, and also being involved in what is effectively a very fast-paced, emergent cultural phenomena. So all of that happening at the same time. For me, it's been like a mix of exciting and like activating, in the sense of like activating parts, unresolved aspects of myself. It has a way of bringing that out, of bringing up whatever aspects of my ego structure, like exploring things like a need to be seen. That's part of my personality, and like wanting to shine and be seen. Exploring letting go and surrendering and feeling, and that whole process of feeling into stuff, like, that's not necessarily my natural way of being. Although with meditation, I've been meditating for like my whole adult life, so in that sense I know how to do it. But I don't know if it's my default place, like issues of
What's the default?
What is my default?
You seem if I felt into it, it feels like you're kind of a grappler. Like you definitely seem to be less agreeable. That you're temperamentally, like you're ready to go at it or something, like, or wrestle with it or something like that.
That feels very true for me, and that's interesting. You pick up on that. There's some kind of internal frustration or energy with just wanting to grapple is a good word. I grapple and test. I'd rather shake something and see if it breaks, and then if it does, okay, that doesn't work, and do something else. Um,
Mm.
that's kind of a default. So being patient, slowing down, feeling into, surrendering, all of those require, paradoxically, quite a lot of effort. There's actually a line, I think it's from the Tao Te Ching, or is it from one Taoist philosopher, which just says, when effort has been used to achieve effortlessness, then you've grasped it, then you get it, and that
Yeah.
stays with me. Oh, I thought of it, I think this morning or maybe the day before,
Mm.
that came to me, and I was like,
Mm.
yeah, that's a real
Yeah.
message for me that really sticks with me.
Yeah. Something about I really felt kind of Jung, where he talks about that sense of where, the second half of life where your psyche does a flip flop, right? Where um, what ends up enlightening you is not what you're good at, but your inferior functions, as he would say. Um, I'm sensing, I can hear that in the backdrop, right, of my awareness as you're talking about, like, yeah, I normally want to like fight it and punch it and wrestle with it, and right, but I'm learning patience, and I have to, and in fact, I say koans to myself to remember. And I think where my attention goes in listening to you is imagining there must be something that makes that struggle that it is to be patient and to be more listening, or what you're talking about, that would call that struggle out in you. Like, what's the thing on the horizon that has you not punch things and instead allow things and be interested in them?
Is very interesting. I get this
I
image
like
when you
smile.
yeah, I get this image though. I get this image when you say, what's that thing on the horizon? Of this kind of like, it's interesting. Well, I was in Estonia one time at midsummer, and it was about probably the furthest north I've ever been. And even though they don't have full light all night long, like you would further up in, say, like northern Sweden, they have this little strip of light over the horizon. And
Mm,
that image just came to me as you were saying that. It's like, what is that thing? I don't know. That's such a mystery, right? Like that's the
yeah,
kind of
totally.
that's the kind of eternal mystery, because there does seem to be this kind of sense of some coherence or cohesion pulling from the future. That was like a big idea Terence McKenna had. This attractor at the end of time. Instead of things moving forward, things are being drawn in,
Mm,
and that's always been, yeah, an interesting idea for me. I know I kind of drift in and out of connecting with it, but
mhm.
as you're talking about it, I'm thinking like, when I link it to myself personally, like where does it link to me personally? Like my future self in a way, or a potential future self calling, that feels more real to me, even though it's kind of hazy still and mysterious. It's like there's
Yeah.
some kind of potentiality,
Yes.
drawing me towards some version of myself. Um, and that seems like really trippy and mysterious as I talk about it. Like it's just so,
Mm.
yeah, very mysterious.
So as you talk about it, it it presents as kind of a mystery to you. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
There's I think, I guess this kind of circles back to the beginning of the conversation where I think what I mean by response, right, is you could say, my understanding is like every single movement that we do is a response that to the finding ourselves existing, right? Like in this weird coupledness with your environment and the world and with each other and all the different like network of relations that go all the way down. Um, so what I think, like, that's, I think where my question was coming from was that kind of understanding of like, oh yeah, like I think on one level I'm hearing it's been a personal ride up to this point, and it's taken something to develop. On one level, there's something innate there, right? that draws you to it in the first place. But I would imagine that co-fashioning and co-shaping of, you know, in this case, like the channel, like Rebel Wisdom, right? If we take that example, it's 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 called forth patience and things that are not necessarily naturally temperamental for you to cultivate, right? And I think in just the responsiveness, right, seems to announce some kind of understanding that makes you respond that way. So like when you talk about like the mystery, well, yeah, it's mysterious, right? However, your responsiveness knows to respond to it, like that sense of it, right? What is that sense?
Oh, that is super interesting. What is that sense?
Yeah.
It's like there's some kind of feeling of okay, I'm trying to map this out, what it feels like to me. There's some kind of feeling of knowing that the thing happening is a thing being called for and that's needed, because there's some sense of like underlying rightness to it. For example, even if it's actually really stressful and unpleasant. Like for example, I like personality wise. So before Rebel Wisdom, I was writing novels or trying to write novels. I went through a little bit of a mini burner, like mini writer's burnout. And was also working 9 to 5s, like pretty high intensity. I was a sales director in creative agencies. I was doing, before that, I was doing that part-time and running a meditation school with my wife. So always doing lots of these things were quite individualist. Like I was kind of very individual, and it was, I'm going to do it myself. And if I don't do it by myself, then I didn't really do it. You know, this is a kind of a psychological structure. Like, doesn't really count unless you manage to do it yourself.
Yeah.
This is like a self-belief.
Yeah.
And the process of Rebel Wisdom, in part, has been one of being like, it's co-creative in so many ways. It's co-creative because it's me and David. It's also co-creative because we are co-creating with the world around us to make the channel and to cover stuff. The kind of direction we're moving in is much more around encouraging co-creation in our community and building stuff all together, working with people. All of those things are growth areas for me personally. And so even though there's times where I just want to go like, oh my God, I just want to do everything myself. I just don't want to have to just like, you know, check in with other people in any way. I just want to go lone wolf and just do all of that. So even though that feeling can be really strong sometimes, there's this, to circle back, there's this feeling of, but this is exactly what I need. This is the rightness of it. Like this situation I am in right now is exactly where I want to be. And it's also where part of my ego doesn't want to be. But within all that kind of mishmash, there's some underlying sense of like, yeah, this is right. This is good for me. This is where I need to be going. And this is what needs to be happening right now. So that is the feeling that like, that's partly what the thing is, I think.
Yes. So I was struck by the thing that you said, like how you put it, there's an underlying feeling of rightness. Something's got to be right? That then allows you to, it sounds like it allows you to tune into or grapple with yourself in doing things that aren't necessarily what you want to do in that moment. And it sounds like something about, you mentioned the ego structure of being the individual. It's an interesting way of putting it, of like, if I didn't do it, I didn't do it. If I didn't do it myself, right? So there's a kind of what I'm hearing is that you found in some ways, I would imagine, that has occurred, that do it myself has occurred to be the thing to sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right? Where it used to be the thing to make sure of, and now it's the thing, because that's the big question often is like, if you can do anything, well, what's the right sacrifice? That's not necessarily that obvious. but it
Yeah.
seems like you're finding there's some kind of sense of sacrificing what used to be the goal is now
Hmm. Yeah, that's
appearing.
really astute. That really that takes me aback a little bit, because there's something about sacrifice as a concept and as a practice that I value very highly.
Hmm.
The way you've just framed that feels feels true, and almost like a new way of seeing it, where I'm like, it's something relaxes in me a little bit. I notice like my shoulders relax a bit. I'm like, oh yeah, cool. Okay. Yeah, that
Yeah.
works. So there is something, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that feels quite alive, framed like that for me, because there's something implicit in the idea of sacrifice, is that it's for something too. But for me at least. And so it's like, okay,
Hmm.
yes, that does feel like that is the sacrifice, and that's the kind of
Mhm.
growth. But what's the sacrifice for? And that's where again it gets to that light on the horizon, where I'm like, I don't know. But that's really interesting. That's the kind of our process of becoming, I guess.
Mhm.
I wouldn't want to know, because that would be quite boring.
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And with, I was curious about for you, like which part of what you're doing right now, like with the channel or the other things that you're doing, what, like, what is the experience that you have of doing interviews, of just like the structure of doing interviews, what that's like for you, what's been challenging for you around that, like if it's been challenging, like the process of just going and interviewing people, right? And all of it, like being aware of like there's, I'm sure there's monetary stuff in there. There's like, like there's knowing that there's like a listening that you're speaking into. I've noticed for me just having just started doing these things and putting them out online, there's like, it's opened up worlds like that I'm still finding out about. And I can tell, I can tell for myself that it's been a very self-revealing process in a lot of ways. Like it's had me see a lot of myself, but also kind of see more of what I'm up to in a very magnified way. Just in the process of interviewing people, right? If you want to call this interviewing. Like I'm just curious for you, what is that part of it been like for you?
Yeah, that's been an interesting journey, because like, because I'm more by background a writer and of other things, but David has that kind of, that's been his whole career, right? In part interviewing people. So there's
Mhm.
been a learning process for me, which has been quite cool, of learning some basics as well.
Mhm.
When I did my podcast, Visionary Artist podcast, it was interviews, but it was also kind of like conversations,
Yeah.
and they were everyone was an artist, so it was kind of different to
Mhm.
sitting down with a different kind of thinker, and developing that skill of figuring out where's the gold in this, where's the gold in this conversation. And
Mhm.
then also I noticed that from like between now and maybe like this time last year, I can notice this development in my own style and my own comfort level with it,
Mhm.
where I remember kind of before kind of rigidly feeling like, okay, I've got these 10 questions, I've got to hit these questions, and I've got to kind of move it along. And yeah, I'll be receptive to what's happening, but I got to come back to these questions. And now it's very much
Mhm.
more a process of um, just loosening with it, and coming into more of that kind of inquiry space.
Mhm. Mhm.
This for me is very enjoyable. This for me feels like the level of flow that I really enjoy, and that kind of pulls things out and apart. Some people are more, that's not so much their comfort zone. Some people, if they're,
Mhm.
I don't know, a scientist of some kind or whatever it might be, or have made their career quite cognitively, um, they might not be as comfortable with getting into that kind of more of a flowing space. But I always have this urge to have a kind of conversation with someone that looks a bit like, well, a bit like this, or a little bit like the kind of conversations that happen on our men's weekends, where there's this real openness, curiosity. So that's like an ongoing like process for me of how do you drop into that with anyone? Can you? I don't know, but like it's definitely been. So there's that side of it. There's that kind of practical and stylistic side, and then there's also I mean, just as a process, it's really interesting to observe how they move and how predictable they are, how unpredictable they are, which ones people end up really liking, which can sometimes be a real surprise. Like our one with Doshin, Zen Master, that was like a breakaway hit, you know, that we just did not expect. It has like 350,000 views now. And we thought, maybe 5,000, and who knows? And it just kind of, yeah. So there's this kind of still this kind of total feeling of mystery to all of it, of, you know, what's going to land and what isn't.
Yeah. And I bet it's, has it been a process of listening to what lands, but also following, like, is there, I could imagine that there's maybe been some dissonance sometimes where following that felt sense of what wants to unfold and then looking at what landed is most popular. Have you guys confronted any sense like, oh yeah, I feel like I want to go over here, but like this is getting the most views? I could imagine that being a tension.
Yeah, it is. It's not like a major ongoing tension, but it's certainly there. It's certainly present, because there's always the worry of like getting kind of captured by your audience and doing things that you think they're going to like, and then you start drifting away from your integrity, and also you start losing kind of creativity if that happens. And I've seen like a decent amount of YouTube channels where that has happened. And you know, I mean, it's something that's we want to do stuff that's relevant to people and that lots of people watch, but also I think what comes up for me as I talk about that a little bit is that you can have both. That doesn't have to be the limitation, and that's something we talk about, because if you turn on a TV channel, there's like 10 different shows, and they're all different. You know, one's a drama, one's a comedy. So that's something we've talked about a lot recently, is how do we make space for everything? You know, maybe there's a film that 3,000 people want to watch because they're just like deeply into the history of Christianity or something like that, or meta philosophy, and then some people want to watch something more around kind of what's going on in the culture right now, and some, you know, take on current events.
Yeah, it's what I think I heard. And tell me if I heard this, or tell me if you said this. I definitely heard this. Tell me if there's a this. Is when you were talking about like the process of becoming an interviewer, right? And then how, like, on one hand, from with David and his background, you've learned a lot. You've appreciated learning a lot, of having the sense, you said, finding the gold in this thinker or this person or this conversation. And then you talked about, at first there was a process of being a bit rigid, right? Because it was new to like have 10 questions or to be oriented that way. And that it sounds like you started to learn how to work the clutch, you know, without having to think about it. Like they're syncing up. So there's like unconscious competence that's starting to, right, or conscious competence, or it's becoming, you know, more embodied. And then I saw you have this little smirk, right? You're like, but really, like, I think you said something, I like tapping into that space of discovery. And then you mentioned kind of the flow that we're in right now. And then you went, yeah, I'm trying to find, I heard you say, I'm trying to find, you didn't say this, but I heard a sweet spot, right? Of where there's this kind of awareness of a structure, right, of some kind, but also like, I want to be surprised, or I want to hit that thing I'm most interested in. What is that thing that you're most interested in, that you had almost like a mischievous like grin on your face? I almost stopped you and said, what is that?
I feel like I probably have that look on my face now too. It's it's something like a moment of like a moment where if it were a movie or a play, you go, did not see that coming. You know, that's what I'm. That's what I was looking for when I was,
Yeah.
writing stories. It's
Mm.
kind of what I'm always looking for is some element of being blown away a little bit,
Yeah.
surprised, like wow, like kind of hit by a ton of bricks. The kind of thing in a conversation or a moment where you would like, if you saw it, you would turn to your friend and at the same time you both look at each other. It's like it's that kind of
Yeah.
magic that I think I'm always keen to see or keen to experience,
Mm.
not just in like interviewing someone or whatever it might be, but like in life as well. It's
Mm.
something around novelty and something around surprise, delight. It's I love a twist at the end of a book
Mm.
or a movie. Like that's one of my favorite things, a very well done twist.
Yeah.
And but that surprise and delight doesn't have to be like a single moment. Like I read a book last year called The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, and very briefly, it's sort of like Agatha Christie meets Inception. So this guy's trying to solve a murder, but he keeps jumping into the bodies of other people at this
Mm.
mansion, and he's like meeting himself, and then has to
Mm.
give himself a clue, and like later in the book.
Mm.
So as I was reading that book, I was in a permanent state of delight because it was like watching someone juggle. I was like,
Mm.
oh my God, I can't believe this guy's pulling off this book. This is
Mm.
insane. And it was great because I read an article about it maybe like 6 months later. And the guy said like the book almost broke him. Like he had a wall full of Post-it notes and like strings going because the complexity of it is incredible. And it's flawless. It never breaks. And it's also a really good book. So
Mm.
that for me, like you could take that and put it into an interview. You could take that and put it somewhere else. But like
Mm.
that's a real sweet spot, right? That's a real sweet spot of complete control, but also freedom
Mm.
in that. Yeah, and that I think it is something like sweet spot. That's the word you started with, and that's what it feels like. It's just like a trapeze artist, just on the line between order and chaos.
Yeah. And like right now, where are we at with the sweet spot? What do you say?
I don't know. I feel pretty good.
Yeah, totally. I was noticing when you were talking about, oh, I didn't see that coming. Like that thing that goes like it's an interesting thing that you talked about because on some level, I didn't, where the gold is, right? That's worth doing it, that's having you even calibrate between structure and formlessness and all the different things that you're talking about is this sense of awareness for what you can't be aware of, but to orient around. And it's interesting because I'm kind of hearkening back to this notion of my question before, which is like, what is that thing that's just beyond the horizon that seems to be calling out sacrificing what you're sacrificing, like for the sake of. And I'm wondering, it's like I had a very similar feeling presencing that horizon and this almost a bodily sense. I get this embodied sense of like, okay, that's a little bit to the left from the right, like this orientation for something that you, by definition, you can't know about ahead of time, but you know enough to be oriented around it
Mm,
and calibrate around it.
yeah, that's a mystery too. But it's like a dance. It feels like when you're saying that, I
Yeah.
think of the process of a dance.
Yeah.
There's steps, but also there's flow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Nice talking with you, my friend.
Very nice talking with you as well. I enjoyed this
Yeah,
very much.
absolutely. Congratulations on
Thank you.
moving to a place that moves.
Yeah, on water.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, and you have to go now, right?
I do. I have to go and predictably do moving related stuff. So
Okay. May this be the beginning of much.
yes, would love to do it again for
Yes,
sure.
absolutely, my friend. Mwah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.